Hello, I'm Carol Clem from Australia, and I'm going to call this True Revealing, as some of the revealing some people may not know about. And if they do, that's good. But I'd like to reveal Abraham, the covenant of Abraham, in a more deeper way. So, first of all, the covenant with Abraham is so important because all nations are going to be blessed through him. All the nations and races that were God's seed will be blessed through him. Now, the covenant, Abraham and the covenant of circumcision, there was quite a couple of reasons. It's a spiritual reason of obedience also that Abraham did, and then he did get the child, the promised child, which was probably promised over 40 years, and they were waiting for her, and Sarah was 90 and she could not have children. She had lost that womanhood. Now, a lot of reasons for this covenant: the spiritual obedience, and then the covenant agreement that he would be blessed if he did this, and all his descendants, and to keep Abraham's descendants pure and holy, a seed race from marrying the seed of the demons and Satan is referred to in Genesis 3. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. It shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. And in Samuel, we know David, 1 Samuel 17:26, David spoke to the men that stood by him, saying, "What shall be done to this man that killeth this Philistine, this giant, and takes away the reproach from Israel?" Well, this uncircumcised Philistine giants, which is the seed of Satan, that he should defy the armies of the living God. So Israel was the armies of the living God, and they represented the Lord. Now, in Genesis 17:1, we're going to read about Abraham. Abraham was 90 years old and 99. And the Lord appeared to him and said, "I am God Almighty, walk before me wholeheartedly, with all his heart, and I will make my covenant between you and will multiply you exceedingly." And Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, "As for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be the father of a multitude of nations. Neither shall your name any more be called Abram," which meant father, "but your name now shall be Abraham, for the father of multitude." So that meant father of multitude, which is interesting because he was called father when he had no children for a long, long time, that name. "And I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings shall come out of you. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your seed after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto you and to your seed after you. And I will give unto you and to your seed after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession. I will be your God." God said to Abraham, as for you, you shall keep my covenant, you and your seed after you, throughout their generation. This is my covenant which you shall keep. This was new to Abraham. "Between me and you and your seed after you, every male among you shall be circumcised, and you shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a token of a covenant between me and you." That's God's seed. "And he that is 8 days old shall be uncircumcised among you, every male throughout your generations, he that is born in the house or brought with money of any foreigner that is not of your seed. He that is born of your house and he that is brought with money must need to be circumcised. And my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant." We'll go down to Genesis 7:15. "And the promise of Isaac's birth. And God said to Abraham, as for Sarai, your wife, you shall now call her name Sarah. But Sarah means, Sarai means princess, and Sarah means a noble woman. And I will bless her, and moreover, I will give her a son. Yes, I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of peoples shall be of her. Then Abraham fell upon his face and laughed, and said in his heart, Shall a child be born unto him that is 100 years old? And shall Sarah that is 90 years old bear? And Abraham said unto God, Oh, that Ishmael might live before me. And God said, No, but Sarah your wife shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. I'll bless him. With 12 princes shall he beget, and I'll make him a great nation. But my covenant, and I will establish it with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear unto you at this set time in next year. And he left off talking with him, and God went up from Abraham. And Abraham took Ishmael his son, who was 13 years old, and all his house, and circumcised them. He did that the same day, it says here, which is very interesting. That's how obedient he was, and how the authority he had, because he had to have about 300 and something people working for him, because he had cattle and that. So you see the respect he had in his people that work for him and that. So, and Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, and Ishmael was 13 years old. And the self-same day was Abraham circumcised in Ishmael. And all the men of his house, those born in the house and those bought with money of a foreigner, were circumcised with him. Then it talks about, in Genesis 18:1, the Lord comes and appears unto Abraham in the plains of Mamre. And he sat in the tent door in the heat of the day. And he lifted up his eyes and looked, and lo, there was 3 men stood by him. And when he saw them, he ran to meet them from the tent door and bowed himself towards the ground and said, Oh, my Lord, if now I have found favour in your sight, pass not away, I pray you, from your servant. Let a little water, I pray, be fetched, and wash your feet, and rest yourself under the tree. And I will fetch bread and comfort your hearts, that you may pass on, and therefore you come to your servant. And they said, So do, as you have said. And Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, Make ready 3 measures of fine meal, and knead it, and make cakes upon the hearth. And Abraham ran and fetched and picked a tender and good calf, and gave it to a young man to dress it and to prepare it. And he took butter, milk, and the calf, and dressed it, and he stood by them under the tree, and they did eat. And they said unto him, Where is Sarah your wife? And he said, In the tent. And he said, Well, certainly I will return unto you according to the time of life. This would have been Jesus Christ speaking. And to Sarah your wife shall have a son. And Sarah heard it in the tent door which was behind him. And Abraham and Sarah were so old and well stricken in age, and it ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of woman. Therefore Sarah laughed within herself, not loud, saying, After I waxed old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord, being old also? And the Lord said unto Abraham, Wherefore did Sarah laugh, saying, Shall I of a surety bear a child in my old age? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the time appointed I'll return unto you, according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. Now I'm going to ask the question, in a minute. Then Sarah denied, saying, I laughed not. She was afraid. And he said, No, but you did laugh, because she thought, I didn't laugh on the outside. I laughed, but I laughed inside. And the men rose up thence and looked towards Sodom, and Abraham went with them to bring on the way. And the Lord said, Shall I hide from Abraham that thing which I do, seeing that Abraham shall surely become great and mighty nation, and nations of all earth shall be blessed through him? For I know him, that he will command his children, his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord, do justice and judgment, and the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he has spoken of him, the promises. So he talks about Sodom and Gomorrah, and that is a story of itself, how you can see the mercy of Abraham, who brings it down to 10 at the end, thinking that there will be 10 because he knew Lot, his wife's brother. Sarah's brother was living there with lots of children and grandchildren, and he thought there'd be at least 10 that would be righteous there. So he starts off, I think, with 50, is it? I'd have to look. Anyway, so this is very interesting. I'm going to go back to Genesis 18:14. Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the time appointed, I will return unto you according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. I'm going to say that, and Sarah said, I denied laughing. Now, Sarah laughed. Now, we always hear by the scriptures, Sarah's laughed and laughed and laughed. We never hear something else. Did Abraham laugh? I'm going to ask that question. Let's go back to 17, Genesis 17:17. Then Abraham fell upon his face and laughed, and said in his heart, shall a child be born unto him 100 years old, and shall Sarah that is 90 years old bear? Okay, then I'm going to ask you a question. Who laughed first? Well, when you go back to Genesis 17:7, it's Abraham laughed first. Abraham laughed first. And Sarah laughed inside. So, and then we have, God has a good sense of humour, really good sense of humour, because he decides, what name does he call the promised son? Isaac, which means laughter, because they both laughed. Actually, Abraham laughed first. And we always hear of Sarah as the one that laughed. But when you read the scriptures, it's actually Abraham laughed first. So the promise come, which was a time of blessing, because she fell pregnant in a couple of months. And at that time, Sodom and Gomorrah at that time was actually destroyed, where Lot, her brother, and all them were. And they did not know if they died at the time or what happened, but they had joy. They had like some sadness there and joy because that happened. And she fell pregnant, because it said that time next year she'd be pregnant, she would have the child, and he'd come. So after the circumcision, just a few months after they healed, she was actually pregnant. And in that time, around that time, and the Lord and the two angels visited them, and they made the unleavened bread and the calf and the milk and the cheese for them, the milk and the curd. They actually, that was the time that they did Sodom and Gomorrah to be destroyed, and the other three, Zor and the other two places. So there was a joy and there was a little sorrow, because Sarah's brother was Lot. Thank you very much for listening to that. Next time, it might be a good season for me to talk about the Passover, because it's coming up on the April the 15th, and unleavened bread, 16th to 27th, and why we count the Omer to 50 days to Pentecost. So there's a lot in that, and there's the original Passover has a lot more meaning in it than some people know. Some people would know it, but some may not. So I'd love to share that with you. Thank you very much for listening. And if you like this, press like. Thank you.